All right, this is Pre-Algebra lesson 8.4, writing rules for linear functions. Okay, so here's the deal. To write a rule for a function, you're going to need to have a table. Am I talking about one of these tables? No. Not talking about one of those tables. I'm talking about a math table, right, where we've done this. What goes on the left? What's this left column? That's the x, right? And then the right column is the y. Okay, couple of things you need to understand. Okay, I'm going to show you something that you just need to understand and remember. If I'm asking you to write for me an equation, what's an equation look like? We've done this lots of times. What's an equation look like? Tell me, just give me some characteristics of an equation.
X.
There's an x. With that, you're giving me a sample. Tell me what, if you had to say, explain to me an equation, what would you say? Don't give me a sample. What's an equation?
It's a problem that has a variable.
A problem that has a variable. What else?
That equals
It has an equal, right? An equation, right? So there's a variable and there's an equal sign. Okay? If I was to ask you to give me an equation, it would be something like, well, y equals 2x plus 3. That's an equation. This is a, what type of an equation is that? Slope intercept form. But what is this? Would be called a linear equation, right? This one's a linear equation because you know it forms a line because it's been written in slope intercept form, right? It's been written in slope intercept form. So we know it's a line. This is a linear equation. And what would this be called? Y is greater than 2x plus 3. That would be not an equation, but what's it called when you have one of these babies? It's called an inequality, right? Fine. But we're not talking about that today. We've also talked so far about functions, right? In fact, this lesson is called Writing Rules for Linear Functions. So here's the deal. You remember what a function is? Remember there's the box here, right? There's an input and an output. Remember us talking about this? Input, output, and then whatever happens inside the box, like the x is what goes in, the y is what comes out, and this could be x plus 3. You know what I'm saying? So when you shove in your x, what happens to it? Comes out what? Comes out? It adds 3 to it, right? Comes out y. It comes out 3 bigger because whatever we put in, it's at 3 is being added to it. Makes sense? Okay. How you write a function is a little bit different than an equation. Here's how it works. You ready? I'm going to show you the difference between an equation and a function. That's an equation. Okay. A function looks like this. What's the difference between the two? What's the difference between those two things I have circled?
X is on both sides. There's two variables.
What's the difference between the two? Instead of a y, it says f of x. That's the only difference. Absolutely everything else is identical, right? This right here is function notation, and that is an equation. They're no different. The f of x, and y are the same thing. Okay. If you ever see something and it says f of x equals, what can you replace f of x with? Y. You're allowed to do that. Okay. One is just written in a different notation. One is written differently. It would be like me saying, what's the difference between 5 times 4 and 5 times 4 and 5.4? What's the difference between those? There's no differences, right? They're just written differently. That's the same thing with these two guys here. They're talking about the same thing. They're just, one is written in function notation and one is written as an equation. Does that make sense? So, let me go up here and change this again. Here's my table. I can go x and y, or I can go, what? X and f of x. That's how you say that when you see an f and then an x, you go, that is f of x. That's what you say, f of x. Okay, everybody say f of x. That's f of x, right? Now listen, whenever you're doing function notation, it doesn't always have to be an x. It can be That would be G of H. Okay? It can be B of C. Right? It doesn't matter, whatever. It doesn't change the fact that you can always change that thing to Y. Right? To solve the function, you can always change that to Y. It's just like this. If I said, what's the difference between 2x plus 3 equals 4 and 2 times a smiley face plus 3 equals 4, what's the difference? Okay, so you see that it doesn't make any difference, right? I don't care what I put down there. If I have G of H, that's the same thing as Y. Or F of X, same thing as Y. Or, Z of B, it's the same thing. Make sense? Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. In our tables, this is how you solve or you deal with a function, and you're going to make a rule. You're going to write a rule here. Here's the deal. It's the change in Y. Remember this? Change in Y over the change in X. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Right? That tells you this only works in linear functions, but really, isn't this the slope formula? Isn't that y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1? Isn't that the same thing?
Yeah.
We've talked about this. Okay, it's the change in y over the change in x. And so here's the deal. Here's x, and here's f of x, which you can write as y, right? Whatever. But if they have f of x, here's the rule. How do you write your answer? If they want to know, if they say f of x, then when you give me your answer, you're going to have it written in function notation. You're going to have your answer be f of x. If they have an x and a y there, then you're going to write the answer as a y. Does that make sense? That's how you know the difference. X and f of x. Okay, I have this negative 2, 0, 2, and 4. And I have negative 5, 1, 7, and 13. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how you write this rule. Here's how you work this problem. You look at all the x's and you see what is happening here. What happened? I went from negative 2 to 0. What happened there?
Add 2.
That was plus 2. To go from 0 to 2, what happened there? Plus 2. To go from 2 to 4, plus 2. Are those consistent?
Yes.
Yes, they're plus 2 each time. You're looking for it to be consistent. That means that the change in x, right? The change in x is 2. Right? That was the change in x is 2. Here I went from negative 5 to 1. How did I go? Well, negative 5 to 1 is plus 6. To go from 1 to 7 is plus 6. 7 to 13 is plus 6. Are those consistent? Yes, since they're consistent, what's the change in y? What happens in y here? That's a 6. Oh, so then, that would be 3. The slope of this line is 3. Okay, the slope of the line is 3. Now here's the deal. Here's the tricky part. So listen. So we know that m equals 3. The slope is 3. Agreed? We just looked at that. That's what we just figured out. Now, though, they want to know where the equation is. They want to know what the actual equation is, right? We know the slope is this. So listen, how do I write any slope? How do I write any, in slope-intercept form, right? In slope-intercept form. How do I write that? Instead of y, I put f of x, right? So I'm going to go f of x, which is the same thing as y, equals, and it's something x. What's the slope? 3x. We know this. And then what's the b part? That is where it crosses the y, right? Isn't it? What is slope-intercept form? Mx plus b. Well, where's the b? Right? What does the b mean?
The y.
It's the y-intercept. Well, we have to decide where this thing crosses the y. So look here. Whenever we have our coordinates, okay, how do you know where it crosses the y? Without graphing anything, how do you know where it crosses the y? Well, if here's a point right here, right? This is where x is 2. Do you agree? That's where x is 2. If there's another point right here, this is where x is 4. If it crosses right here, this is where x is 0. So wherever x is 0, whatever y is, that's the y-intercept, right? Look, when it hits, do you agree that this point right there is the y-intercept? Okay, so whenever x is 0, whatever y is, that's the y-intercept. So can we go up here and look in our table and see any place where we see where x is 0?
Yes.
Oh, when x was 0, y was 1. So we know that the y-intercept is 1. So can I finish writing my rule here?
Yes.
How can I write my rule? What do I add to my rule?
Plus one.
Plus 1. F of x equals 3x plus 1. That's our rule. That is this function right here. Does that make sense? Make sense? Okay. Let's try one. Let's do another one. We'll do one more together. Okay? We'll do one more together, and then I'm going to let you try one. Okay. Here's negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. And then we have negative 2, 0, 2, and 4. Okay? This is what we're going to do. Here's the deal. First thing we look for, this is x and this is y. Oop, we don't put y. Why don't we put y? They didn't put y. They put f of x. Could I put g of b?
Yes.
Could I put whatever I wanted? The x's, what's happening for each x? What's happening each time in the x column?
They're adding together.
Plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, right?
Yeah, I was looking at FX.
What's happening in the f of x? Plus 2. So what's the rule? How do I do this? It's the change in y over the change in x. What's the change in y? What's the change in y? 2. What's the change in x? 1. What's the slope? 2 equals a 2 slope. So let's start writing our rule then. F of x equals, what do I put? 2x. We have to put the x there because it's whatever comes in front of the x. 2x. And now I have to go, okay, what is the b? Where is it cross the y? Well, where is it? Where it crosses the y is when x is 0. So you go up here to where x is 0. When x is 0, y is 0. So then I could put plus 0. Is that important? No. So then there is our rule. F of x equals 2x. Does that make sense? Okay. Now you guys try one. It's letter C on page 419 if you want, but I'll draw it for you, or I'll create it for you. There's x and f of x, and it goes -6, -4, -2, 0, -11, -7, -3, and 1. It does say y this time. And if it says y, what do? When you give me your answer would say y equals. Don't have to graph it. I just want the rule. Good. You're getting it. Good. You're getting it. Good. Good. Why do you think it's wrong? Okay, so here you're watching. All right, so here we go. Here's the deal. First thing we look for is we have to find the slope, right? To find the slope, that is change in y over the change in x. Some of you are gonna switch those and put x over y. Guess what? It's never that. So you just have to remember that. It's y over x. You have to memorize that. I can't make you memorize that, but you have to memorize that. It's y over x. Change in y over the change in x. Okay? What is the change in y? Well, what is happening on each one of these? Plus 4, right? So one thing we haven't talked about is that if you ever see one and it goes like this, and there's like if it goes like plus 4, plus 3, plus 4 on one side, and then over here is, minus 2, minus 2, minus 2. That wouldn't even be a line, right? It's not a line anymore. Because it would be a jut in the line, right? It would go, okay, not a line. Does that make sense? Because these are consistent, because these things are consistent, we know it's a line. Anyway, what's happening in the x over here? Plus 2. Right? So then the change in y is? Change in y. What is the change in y? 4. The change in x? 2. The slope is? 2, right? The slope is 2. So now we can go y equals 2x. Now we have to decide, where does it cross the y? What is the y-intercept? Well, when x was 0, y was? Plus 1. And we're done. Y equals 2x plus 1.
What? It was F. You wrote FX.
No, I didn't. Raw.
You changed it.
I did change it. Make sense? Did you get it, Brad?
Yeah.
Good. Make sense, people? Okay. What about this then? Here we go. I'm going to give you one of these really quick before I give you your homework. I'm going to give you this graph. And I want you to write for me a rule, okay? I want you to write for me a rule for this graph. Okay? To write me a rule, all it means is you're going to write for me the equation. But if they say write for me a rule, then you need to make it f of x. Does that make sense? So, I'll do this one for you. Watch. It's going to be f of x equals, and it's going to be something x plus or minus something, right? Isn't that what it's going to be? It's a line. I'm going to write this in slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. So, what's the slope of this baby?
Half.
Up 1 over 2. Agreed? It's up 1 over 2. So that's a 1/2 slope. So I'm going to go f of x equals 1/2 x. And where does it cross the y again?
2.
Plus 2. And I'm done.
Can we try one of those? Just make sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can.
Write for me a rule for that line. Anytime you see a line, people, what's the first thing that should go through your head? There's a couple of things that should go through your head. Positive or negative, right? What is this line?
Negative.
It's a negative line, right? So you should have that. You should recognize that. What else should you quickly just decide? It's steep. So the number is going to be bigger than 1. That's the two things that just go in your head so that when you work on this and you get it done, you should go, does that work with what I know? Okay, so here it is. It's going to end up being f of x or y equals, f of x equals, what's the slope? Down 2 over 1 is a negative 2x then, right? There's the slope, negative 2x. And where does it cross the y?
Negative 2.
Minus 2. The answer is f of x equals negative 2x minus 2. You put plus 2?
No, I put minus 1.
Does that look like a minus 1? Did you get it? Why?
I didn't do negatives.
You didn't have a negative slope? Gigi, the first thing you see in any line, I'm telling you, that's the first thing that's coming in your head. Is this a positive or a negative? Did you get it right?
No,
Why?
I thought it was 1/2.
How do you do slope? Rise over run, right? And when we first started here, when we were doing here, what did we do? We went down 2. That means the rise is down 2. What is a rise of down 2? Negative 2. And then we ran 1. Right? So rise over run. Last one. Then I'm letting you guys do your homework because we got to do it. Write for me the rule. Write the rule. Okay, here we go. The rule is going to look a whole lot like what? What's it going to look a whole lot like? Slope-intercept form. It's going to look a whole lot like slope-intercept form, except it's going to have, instead of y, it's going to have f of x. So f of x equals mx plus b. Agreed? That's the rule? So f of x equals, what's the slope of this baby? Let's look. We're going from here to here. We went up 2. The rise is 2, right? The rise is 2 and the run is 3. Both positive. When we looked at this line, as soon as we saw this thing, we looked at it and went, oh, it's positive. And we also noticed, ooh, it's a little shallow. Right? So the slope is 2/3. 2/3 x. And then we go, where did it cross the y? That's the b part. Where did it cross the y? Minus 3. There's our rule. F of x equals 2/3 x minus 3. Did you get it? Did you get it? Why? Why? Gigi, listen. Seriously listen. When you saw that when you put your answer down and you put a negative 2/3, you should look and go, is this a negative slope? Is this a negative slope, Gigi? So then you should have looked at that and gone, oh, wait, that doesn't make any sense. I have a negative slope written down here. When I look at my slope here, and it's not negative. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, that's where you have to connect the two. You have to connect them. You have to. When you first look at any of these, you have to look and go, ooh, positive. Ooh, shallow. I know what that means. It's a positive slope. It means that whatever's in front of the x is going to be a positive. Right? And it's shallow. It means it's going to be less than 1. You just have to I've told you the tools. You've got the tools to use them. You can't be brainless when you can't just be mindlessly, okay, and that looks good. Yeah, it looks good. I'm done. No, you've got to use, you got to connect. Jack.
So, you graphed it and I went 1 under it. So mine was 1 down. So I got 1x minus 4.
1x, no.
No, because my...
Right, yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
Okay, your homework. None. We're going to do a lot more about this tomorrow. Believe me, this was a review day, so you're good to go.